So this song is arguably about an insect or a bird or possibly a human, but there's no argument that Lady Bird is an incredible jazz standard, like super hip, and people need to play it way more often. That means you, YouTube viewer person, so go learn it, unless you don't play an instrument, in which case just put a CD on. Now, the composer of Lady Bird, Tadd Dameron, has been kind of forgotten over the last 50 years, but in the middle of the 20th century, he was one of the most important arrangers and composers in jazz. Dameron was a friend of Charlie Parker. He had players like Sonny Rollins, Fats Navarro, Clifford Brown, and Miles Davis in his band. He was roommates with Philly Joe Jones and arranged for big bands led by Count Basie, Artie Shaw, Dizzy Gillespie, and more. So he had some pretty heavy hangs. Dameron wrote Lady Bird back in 1939, but he didn't record and release it until 1948. But for the rest of the bebop era, it was a regular on bandstands right across the country, and probably the world, I guess. Lady Bird is still Dameron's most popular tune in jazz circles, but it's not quite as common as it was in the 50s and 60s, which is unfortunate actually, because it's got a really cool set of changes that everyone should learn. So let's talk about that. Actually, no, we're not going to talk about that yet. First, let's talk about the title. As an Australian living in North America, I found that when you say Lady Bird, people think of different things. So in Australia, and I assume New Zealand and parts of Europe, this is what we would think of when you say ladybird, also known as a ladybug or a lady beetle, like the rhyme that you say in primary school.
Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home. Your house is on fire and your children will burn.
In North America, every time I've mentioned ladybird, something like this has come up in people's minds. You don't need these to be a lady. Birdo can be whatever she wants. But just for reference, Australians do sometimes use the term ladybug or lady beetle along with lady bird. We tend to flip-flop. Of course, we call flip-flops thongs. Now, I'm not sure that there is a quote-unquote definitive version of Lady Bird that exists in the jazz canon. I could be wrong about that. If you think I am, please leave a comment below. But there are a couple of recordings that are definitely worth checking out. The composer Tadd Dameron recorded the song in 1948 with his own band, which featured Fats Navarro. Now, it's often found online or on various CD re-releases under Fats Navarro's name as opposed to Tadd Dameron's, but that's just because Fats had more clout. Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers did a live version of the song at the Cafe Bohemia. The recording quality is not great and the piano's really out of tune, but it's a really good performance. At the end of the song, they also play the theme for Half Nelson, which is a Miles Davis composition that was based on the chords to Lady Bird. Essentially a contrafact. It's not exact though. Both Tadd Dameron's original recording and Art Blakey's version feature the shout chorus for Lady Bird. That's not that common in small ensemble jazz songs, but because Tadd Dameron came out of a big band arranging and compositional background, it makes a lot of sense that he'd want to do it in his own songs as well. And now a quick note, the Nancy Sinatra song of the same name has no relationship to the Tadd Dameron song or to jazz at all. That's despite Nancy Sinatra's connection to the genre through her own music as well as that of her father's. Speaking of connections, let's look at the chords of Lady Bird. The harmony of Lady Bird is pretty interesting and I guess you could argue sort of historically significant because it brings in a lot of the bebop harmonic vocabulary into one place. Now this isn't a theory lesson, so I'm not going to go super deep on this and I'm going to simplify a lot, but please feel free to go deep in the comments if you'd like. Now Lady Bird is in C major, which is just all the white keys of the piano. But what Dameron does is on a couple of occasions throughout the form, he takes chords that are outside of the harmony of C major, and that makes the whole thing sound a bit more interesting and exotic, I guess. The simplest way to explain it, I think, is that while the song is in C major, every couple of bars, Dameron moves back and forth between C major and C minor. The technical term for this is borrowing chords from the minor key. However, the most important chords in Lady Bird come in the last 2 bars with the Lady Bird, or the Tadd Dameron turnaround. A typical jazz turnaround is a 1, 6, 2, 5 turnaround, and that's a C, A minor, D minor, and G7 in the key of C. And then that typically pulls back to the C major at the very top of the form. In Lady Bird, Dameron does something a little different, and stay with me, we're almost done here. Instead of a 1, 6, 2, 5 turnaround, he goes 1, flat 3, flat 6, flat 2, all major 7th chords typically, and then that pulls down a semitone to the 1 again, the C major 7 at the top of the form. There are 2 ways that I think of this. The main one is that each of those chords, with the exception of the 1, is a tritone substitution of the 1, 6, 2, 5. And a tritone substitution is another very common thing that jazz musicians do to reharmonize a piece of music. I also hear it as another case of Tadd Dameron borrowing chords from the C minor, because the flat 6 and the flat 3 both exist in C minor, and then the flat 2 acts as a kind of passing chord back to the 1. I guess if this video has a point at all, it's that Lady Bird is harmonically a pretty important song from a historical perspective, but it's also just a really great tune to listen to. Dameron wrote a melody that weaves through these kind of complex changes in a really nice, natural way. So whether you're playing the song or whether you're just checking it out to listen to, there is so much to be pulled out of the song and the performances that are Lady Bird. So if you do have a couple of minutes, please check out some of the links in the description where I will list the various recordings that I've mentioned and a couple of others that all exist on YouTube for free. Thank you for watching. I always appreciate you getting to the end of these things because I know they're a little bit niche. It's a nice way to put it. I've got a couple of other videos about jazz here and here, if you'd like to check them out. Please like and subscribe. That's a nice, useful thing for me and hopefully easy for you to do. I will see you next time. Thank you very much.